Have you ever wondered what you would do if you only had a few minutes to live and needed to leave a message that would reveal the whole truth? This is the kind of dilemma that doesn't appear in thrillers, but in real stories that carry more riddles than answers. Before I continue, I'll ask you, are you subscribed to the channel? If not, take advantage now, subscribe, like, and comment below, because this kind of content only makes sense when you participate and help spread the word about these investigations. What I'm going to reveal today isn't obvious, and perhaps even seems counterintuitive. A victim's last word isn't always a cry for help. Sometimes it's a code, a trap, or even a secret buried for decades. We'll embark together on an investigation that blends logic, enigmas, and breathtaking twists. And be prepared. In the end, the question that will remain isn't who killed, but what the truth is capable of destroying when it finally comes to light. I'll never forget that night. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the darkness itself wanted to swallow me. As I entered the office, I felt that familiar chill down my spine that only appears when something isn't right. The victim lay motionless on the desk, a smudged note resting next to his hand. In years of investigation, I've seen a lot, but the scene seemed to carry a deafening silence, as if the walls wanted to scream a secret I couldn't yet hear. The room smelled strange, a mixture of old wood, dust, and a faint metallic aroma, a sign that the blood was still fresh. The table was disorganized, but not in an unusual way. It looked as if someone had rummaged through it hurriedly, looking for something specific. Every detail, from the position of the pen to the overturned chair, formed a silent narrative. And I learned over time that the crime scene always speaks as long as you know how to listen. As I analyzed the note, I realized it wasn't just any note. The words were encrypted, replaced by symbols and letters swapped. Half the message was illegible, blurred on purpose or by accident. It wasn't yet clear. This intrigued me because common criminals don't leave riddles, they leave obvious traces. This note was different. It was almost as if the victim had tried to leave me a clue, but also an intellectual challenge. What made me uneasy was the feeling that someone was still there, hidden in the mystery of those blurred lines. The scene seemed poised to test me, as if it were a chessboard, and I had just taken the first step. But deep down I knew, what I saw in that room was only the beginning. The real game was about to begin, and it would take me far beyond the walls of that office. The victim's name was familiar to me. Dr. Arthur Lane, retired, but never forgotten by international intelligence circles. During the Cold War, he was a key player in operations involving encrypted messages, some of which could have changed the course of history if they fell into the wrong hands. I had read reports about him in classified files, but I never imagined I would one day have to examine his life through the prism of a brutal crime. Lane was respected for cracking impossible codes, but he also carried the reputation of having kept secrets that should never see the light of day. People like that don't live in peace. They live surrounded by dubious allies and invisible enemies. As I walked through the office, I noticed old medals and framed newspaper clippings. It was almost a private museum, a testament to achievements that were simultaneously glories and curses. I remembered a case in Moscow I investigated years ago. A scientist disappeared after revealing he still had microfilms from the 1960s. The story ended badly, and that memory made me see Arthur Lane in the same shadow. People who carry historical secrets become targets, even decades later. The difference is that Lane seemed to know this day would come, and perhaps that's why he left that note as a last gasp of resistance. It was inevitable to wonder, what if the murder wasn't just personal, but political? The Cold War past still resonates today, and anyone who stirs this hornet's nest could awaken forces that prefer to remain hidden. The smudged note wasn't just a clue to me. It could very well be a trigger for something bigger, a domino that if it fell would topple the entire board. And I was about to discover where that could lead me. Arthur Lane wasn't just a brilliant cryptographer. He was also an enigmatic man. Over the course of his career, he built a solid but distant reputation. He was the type you respected but didn't feel comfortable approaching. It was said that even in social gatherings, he maintained a watchful gaze as if he were reading people rather than conversing with them. It wasn't hard to imagine that he had accumulated both allies and enemies along the way. As I looked through his old photos, I noticed a curious pattern. In almost all of them, Lane appeared alone, or in the shadow of major political figures, never at the center. This revealed a lot about his lifestyle, someone important, yet invisible. This invisibility, however, was also his greatest protection, and ironically, perhaps the reason for his death. Because deep down, those who choose to live in the shadows always risk being erased by them. On his desk lay a partially burned diary. The intact pages contained coded notes and observations about discrete encounters dating back decades. I realized I wasn't just looking at a victim, but a man who, until the end, carried the responsibility of protecting secrets. For someone like him, death wasn't just a biological destiny, but almost an inevitable consequence of the job. As I reflected on this, I couldn't help but draw a parallel with my own life. As an investigator, I've also found myself surrounded by secrets that weighed more than I could bear. Often, what we keep hidden consumes us more than what we reveal. Perhaps Arthur knew this better than anyone, and it was precisely at that point that I realized understanding who he was would be the key to understanding what really happened that night. When I took the note in my hands, the rough texture of the paper already betrayed its importance. It wasn't just any paper. It looked ancient, almost like the kind used in military documents, weather-resistant. The letters, however, were interspersed with strange symbols, some resembling mathematical symbols, others invented markings. The disturbing detail was the blurring. Half the message was smeared as if someone had tried to erase the truth with their bare hands. Looking at that note was like staring into a broken mirror. Each piece reflected a possibility, but the whole remained a mystery. The words that could still be read didn't form a clear sentence, but they gave the sense that something vital was hidden there. It was an invitation to logic, but also a provocation. Whoever writes a note like that doesn't just want to be understood. They want the reader to deserve understanding. I remembered a hard lesson I learned in another investigation years ago. The most important message is never the one that's explicit, but the one hidden in the flaws, in the details, between the lines. The shaky handwriting, the choice of symbols, the haste with some strokes, all of this told a parallel story, perhaps even more valuable than the message itself. The victim seemed to know he had little time, but chose to use the last few minutes to encode a truth. And it was precisely in this detail that I realized that note wasn't just a clue, but a final act of resistance. Lane, in his death, was still playing the game he had always mastered, that of intelligence and logic. And if I wanted to move forward, I would have to enter this board, deciphering not just blurred letters, but also the mind of a man who, until the end, believed that riddles were the only sure way to reveal what mattered. When the first officers arrived, their rush to classify the case as a simple robbery bothered me. It was almost an automatic reflex. Door broken down, house ransacked, victim dead. To them it was clear. But I've learned over the years that the more obvious the scene seems, the greater the chance we're dealing with something carefully planned. A rush to conclusions has always been the enemy of truth. The curious thing is that nothing had been taken, at least nothing visible. The wallet, the wristwatch, and even a sum of cash were intact. This already disproved the theory of a common robbery. But as is often the case, the need to quickly conclude the report led the team to cling to what seemed easiest. The truth is that initial investigations are almost always born lazy, and only survive thanks to those who insist on looking further. As they made bureaucratic notes, I noticed details that escaped the superficial eye. A half-open drawer, the missing safe, and the smudged note ignored on the table. To me, these elements screamed, but to most they were nothing more than noise. Perhaps it was my arrogance, but I knew that if this case were treated as just another botched robbery, the whole truth would be lost in silence. It's in these moments that I realize how the detective's job demands more than technique. It demands patience, almost stubbornness. It's not enough to accept the first version. You have to doubt it. And there, faced with a rushed police force, I realized that my role would be precisely that. To refuse to accept the obvious. After all, the true crime rarely reveals itself on the surface. It hides in the layers that few have the courage to explore. At the bottom of the note, a detail caught my attention. A single letter, written firmly, almost in contrast to the haste of the rest of the text. A simple R, nothing more. At first glance, it could have been just an unimportant initial, but through investigation I learned that small details are actually portals to great revelations. That letter seemed to scream, begging to be noticed. What was intriguing was that no one close to Lane had that name. I combed through records, old diaries, and saved letters, but nothing suggested anyone with the initial R. This made me even more suspicious. After all, when someone is on the brink of death, they don't waste energy on empty symbols. That letter carried weight. Could it be the killer's initial? Or perhaps a location, a code, a secret organization? I remembered an old case where an anonymous note bore only an incomplete signature. We later discovered it wasn't an initial but rather a symbol used in encrypted messages during covert operations. It was a reminder that things aren't always what they seem. Could be a direct clue or, on the contrary, a trap to lead me astray. As I analyzed the letter's outline, I noticed something curious. The handwriting on the R was firmer than the rest, as if it had been written at another time, perhaps even by another person. And this discrepancy ignited a new flame of suspicion in me. Who really wrote that letter? The victim in his final moments, or the killer himself? Trying to manipulate the game from the beginning. Reconstructing a victim's final hours is like putting together a jigsaw puzzle without a box. You don't have the final picture, just loose pieces scattered on the floor. With Arthur Lane, it was no different. According to neighbors, strange noises echoed through the house around 10 p.m. Heavy footsteps, a chair scraping, perhaps even a door slamming. But the official report pegged the time of death at around 11:30 p.m. This time difference seemed small, but to me it was huge. After all, what happened in that hour-plus gap? Was it when the killer pressured the victim to hand over something? Or perhaps Lane resisted, stalling for time while he tried to write the encrypted note? Every unexplained minute is like a black hole in the narrative, capable of swallowing all the most logical hypotheses. And I've learned that when the clock doesn't add up, there's always a lie hidden somewhere. One detail stood out. The victim's pocket watch, found stopped at 11:12 p.m. Was it a coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences. Either someone deliberately broke it to confuse investigators, or Lane himself stopped it as a way to leave a hidden clue. Time, in this case, was not just an objective marker, but an active player in the enigma. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. That night wasn't just about murder. It was a game of timing. A silent duel between victim and perpetrator, where every minute mattered. The note, the clock, the noises, none of it was disconnected. I just needed to figure out how these pieces fit together, and the answer might be closer than I imagined. An investigation only truly begins when the clues begin to contradict each other. And that's exactly what happened. The medical report said Lane died at 11:30 p.m., but the clock, which had stopped at 11:12 p.m., insisted on telling a different story. As if that weren't enough, one neighbor claimed to have heard a loud bang before 11 p.m., while another swore he saw a light on in the house close to midnight. How could you trust a straight line when the road was full of curves? This confusion was nothing new to me. In many cases, contradictions don't arise by chance. They're manufactured. Someone wants the narrative to become cloudy, so that the truth is diluted amid conflicting versions. It's like watching a magic show while everyone looks at the illusionist's right hand. It's the left that the trick happens. And I knew that in this case, it was no different. So I decided to look at each clue as if it were a play. Who wrote the script? Who wanted me to believe in the clock? Who wanted me to trust the report? This approach has always helped me because at its core, every crime is a narrative told from someone's perspective. The truth is rarely linear. It hides in the cracks between one version and the next. And it was precisely at that moment that I realized the clock hadn't stopped by accident, nor was the report just a formality. Every contradiction was an invitation, almost a whisper, saying, "Look deeper, John, nothing is what it seems." And I was ready to accept that invitation, even though I knew that doing so would plunge me into a spiral where each answer would bring two new questions. In every investigation, there comes a time to look potential culprits in the eye, and in Lane's case, the list of suspects seemed more like a labyrinth than a simple list of names. There were former intelligence colleagues, people who admired and feared him at the same time. There was also an estranged son, marked by old grudges. And finally, a mysterious partner, whose presence always seemed shrouded in shadows. 3 lines of investigation, 3 tortuous paths. The former colleagues had clear motives. Lane knew secrets that could jeopardize their entire careers. Many still held important positions, and a leak could destroy reputations built over decades. This kind of motivation isn't just personal, It's almost a matter of political survival. People like that don't hesitate to eliminate obstacles, and Lane, without a doubt, was an obstacle. The son, on the other hand, brought an emotional component to the situation. Their relationship was marked by arguments over inheritance, accusations of abandonment, and, most importantly, the suspicion that the young man had attempted to steal valuable documents in the past. Even though he had distanced himself physically, the shadow of this conflict remained. Often, it's not the distant enemy that brings us down, but rather the one who once shared our roof. And then there was the partner, almost a ghost. Little was known about him, except that in recent years, Lane had been discreetly meeting with him to discuss undisclosed business. A man who preferred to remain out of the spotlight already merited close attention. It was as if each suspect represented a different side of the same coin: power, resentment, and mystery. And I knew that by choosing which one to investigate first, I might be getting closer to the truth, or to a fatal mistake. In the corner of the room, amidst the dust marks on the floor, there was a void that spoke louder than any visible clue. Lane's safe was gone. It wasn't just any small, portable safe. It was a heavy model, the kind that's difficult to move without planning and strength. This told me two things immediately. The crime wasn't impulsive, and whoever committed it knew exactly what they wanted to take. The absence of the safe reconfigured the entire scenario. If nothing of apparent value had been stolen, then the killer's target was something specific. Hidden within, long-standing rumors suggested that Lane possessed secret Cold War documents that could incriminate governments, reveal treason, or even alter official versions of history. And if these contents were indeed in the face, it made sense that someone would want to silence them forever. I'd seen something similar before in a case involving a Swiss banker. The man had been found dead in his home, apparently the victim of a common robbery. But what was really missing was a locked briefcase, stuffed with records implicating powerful figures. The money was intact, as were the jewelry. Only the briefcase mattered. And now, looking at the empty space where the safe should have been, I noticed the uncanny similarity. It was inevitable to think Lane's murder wasn't about his life, but about what he kept. The safe was more than an object. It was the heart of the mystery. And as I stared at that empty space, I knew the answers I sought lay not just in the smudged note or the stopped clock, but in the contents that disappeared along with that heavy safe, which seemed to carry a dangerous piece of history itself. As I revisited the note calmly and patiently, I realized that some passages resisted the blur. Words emerged like islands, amidst an ocean of uncertainty. One of them immediately caught my attention. The truth, kept in the place where time, it was as if the victim had begun a revelation, but couldn't complete it. Or perhaps someone didn't want it to be completed. The incomplete sentence seemed like an invitation. The place where time, what could it mean? A clock? A calendar? A specific date marked in their files? I've seen criminals hide evidence in unlikely places, like inside antique pendulums or even behind paintings depicting historical scenes. Lane, as a cryptographer, knew that ambiguity was the best way to hide something in plain sight. The more I read those few words, the more I realized it wasn't just a cryptic phrase. It was a mental challenge. The message seemed to taunt me, as if Lane were saying, "You think you can understand me? Prove it." This brought back memories of another case, where a victim left an incomplete note on a foggy bathroom mirror. The message only made sense weeks later, when we were able to connect seemingly trivial dots. And so, faced with a smudged note and a broken sentence, I realized I was at a crossroads. Solving this enigma wouldn't just mean finding a culprit. It would also mean understanding the mind of a man who lived by secrets. And deep down, Lane seemed to want me to walk in precisely that direction. As if even in death, he were still guiding every step of the investigation. Deciphering an incomplete message is like assembling a jigsaw puzzle, knowing that several pieces were burned before reaching your hands. Yet, each remaining fragment holds the power to reconstruct the entire picture, if used wisely. Lane's phrase, "the truth, stored in the place where time," forced me to see beyond the words. It wasn't just reading, it was reasoning. Almost a mental duel between him and me. Logic, in cases like these, works like a compass. It doesn't pinpoint every detail, but it always points in the right direction. If time was the central clue, I needed to think of all the ways Lane could have used that idea. Clocks, diaries, dated notes, Even someone's repeated habits can become invisible safes for secrets. I've learned in other cases that criminals and victims share an uncomfortable truth. The obvious is always the best hiding place. I remembered an investigation where a safe deposit box key was hidden inside an old wall clock, the kind that chimes every hour. Everyone entered the room, but no one noticed the detail until someone asked, "What time is it?" That's when we realized the object wasn't there by chance. Looking around Lane's office, this memory made me notice the clocks, the dated photographs, the marked calendars. Time was everywhere. The feeling I had was clear. Lane hadn't left me a riddle to keep me from the truth, but to prepare me for it. It was as if he were saying, if you can't figure this out, you don't deserve to reach the end. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The logical challenge was the gateway. But what lay beyond it, oh, this promised to reveal secrets that went far beyond a simple investigation. It was when I expanded my analysis of the note that I noticed something that would change the entire course of the injik. The stain covering part of the letters wasn't just blood. There were traces of ink there, applied intentionally, almost like a hurried brush stroke. It was as if someone had tried to erase or distort the message. That gave me chills, because it meant we weren't dealing with a simple random blur, but deliberate manipulation. This changed everything. If the ink had been used to obscure part of the message, then the killer not only wanted to silence Lane, but also to confuse anyone who dared follow the trail. It was a crime within a crime, physical murder, and the murder of truth. This discovery reminded me of a case in which a suicide note had been doctored, letter by letter, to conceal the involvement of others. The trick was the same: distort the narrative. The curious thing is that in this type of manipulation, the criminal always leaves an unintentional trace. And there I noticed that the ink used to smudge the message was different from the one used to write the note. It didn't have the same tone, nor the same pressure on the paper. This simple detail revealed something powerful. The victim had indeed written the message, but someone later decided to mutilate it. And, like all human error, this became a new clue. Suddenly, it wasn't just the message I needed to decipher, but also the intention behind her mutilation. The note was no longer just evidence left by Lane. Now it was also a battleground between victim and killer. A battle of voices on scraps of paper, and I knew that if there was an initial twist, many more were still lurking, waiting to surprise me. As the pieces began to fall into place, a new element appeared on the horizon. Politics. Documents and encrypted notes may seem like unimportant relics, but when they carry truths capable of shaking governments, they become pure dynamite. Rumors swirled that Lane was harboring information that, if revealed, could expose secret Cold War operations, shadowy deals, internal betrayals, and names still active in positions of power. This kind of secrecy doesn't age. It only becomes more dangerous. I remembered an investigation in Berlin, in which a forgotten dossier threatened to reveal shameful alliances between countries that now posed as exemplary allies. The document never saw the light of day, because it mysteriously disappeared. Looking at Lane's case, the similarity was unsettling. It was as if I were facing a historical ghost, repeating the same macabre dance. The most disturbing thing was thinking about the invisible players behind this game. We were no longer talking about just an individual crime, but about larger forces, willing to bury any trace that could compromise decades of official narratives. Lane's death could be just the tip of the iceberg, and I needed to decide if I would have the courage to dive into this ocean of shadows without knowing what awaited me at the bottom. And at that point, I realized I wasn't just investigating a murder. I was dealing with the kind of secret that can shatter reputations, destroy careers, and even start silent wars. The note wasn't just a coded message. It was possibly the key to a vault of truths many people would prefer to keep locked away forever. And the further I went, the clearer it became that I was stirring up a hornet's nest from which I might not emerge unscathed. Among Lane's papers, I found some old, torn letters, full of accusations and resentment, all signed by someone who hadn't seen his father in years, his only son. Their relationship was an open wound. There were reports of violent fights over inheritance, accusations of abandonment, and, most importantly, that the boy had once tried to steal his father's valuable documents. It was the kind of family bond that never heals. It festered. I've seen many cases where family, not external enemies, was the source of the downfall. The son carried a mixture of pain and resentment that could easily become the motive. In his eyes, Lane wasn't just a distant father, he was a keeper of secrets that could in one way or another also belong to him. It's curious how in families like this, love mixes with hate until they become indistinguishable. Still, there was something strange. The son swore he was in another country on the day of his death, presenting flimsy evidence of his whereabouts. Travel documents can be forged, testimonies bought, and I've seen this up close more times than I'd like. The question wasn't just where he was, but why he remained silent for so long in the face of his father's death. Guilt? Fear? Or simply indifference? As I analyzed this eroded family bond, I realized that Lane's past could not be separated from his present. The estranged son wasn't just a supporting character, he was a key piece in a puzzle of emotions and interests. And deep down, I knew that in stories like this, blood wounds often leave deeper scars than any political conspiracy. Perhaps the key to the smudged note also lay within this broken bond. Days later, when the dust seemed to have settled, a neighbor appeared. An elderly, discreet woman, the kind nobody notices much in everyday life. She claimed to have seen a shadow entering Lane's house that night, but took a while to tell him. She said she was scared, that she didn't want to get involved. This delay always catches my attention, because silence, in many cases, speaks louder than the voice itself. The witness described the figure as tall, quick-moving, someone who seemed to know the place well. It wasn't a detailed account, but it was enough to open a new avenue of investigation. And despite its simplicity, there was something about the way she hesitated that made me suspicious. Experience has taught me that people like this aren't just hiding their fear of the criminal, but also secrets they'd rather not reveal. I remembered a case where a doorman remained silent for weeks until finally admitting he'd seen the killer flee. He hadn't spoken up before because the suspect was influential, capable of ruining his life in a matter of hours. Silence, in this case, nearly buried the truth forever. Listening to Lane's neighbor, the memory came flooding back. Did she also know more than she was letting on? As I watched her, I realized her story was an incomplete mosaic. Maybe it was true, maybe only a piece of it was. But something told me that amid her pauses and evasive glances, there was crucial information. I just needed to find the right way to get her to talk, because sometimes the weakest witness holds the key that dismantles the entire theater of lies. I spent entire nights analyzing the note, zooming in on details, testing combinations, until a pattern began to emerge. It wasn't just random writing. It was a classic cipher, a mixture of substitution and transposition. Symbols and letters danced in a sequence that at first seemed meaningless, but gradually began to align before my eyes. Patience, once again, proved to be an investigator's most lethal weapon. With each attempt, a new word emerged, until finally I managed to piece together a repeating sequence. It was as if Lane had left a trail of breadcrumbs along the way. And amidst these repetitions, one term stood out: clock. The word leaped from the paper with a disturbing force, as if it were the password to unlock not just a riddle, but an entire story. It made sense immediately. Time had always been the guiding thread of this investigation. The time of death, the stopped clock, the interrupted sentence in the note. Now the cipher itself pointed to that same symbol. It was as if Lane had woven all the clues around a single idea, making it clear that to understand its truth, I would need to decipher the mystery of time. But at the same time, the simplicity of the word made me suspicious. Was it a direct clue, or just another layer of smoke to distract me from the truth? Because if Lane mastered the art of cryptography so well, why choose something so obvious? This doubt gnawed at me. After all, in games like this, the greatest danger isn't what's hidden, but what seems too easy to understand. As I examined Lane's pocket watch, one thing kept coming to mind. Why did this object seem so central to every clue? It was ancient, heavy, with almost invisible notches on the side. When I opened it, beyond the stationary hands, I noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible compartment, a secret within a secret. Carefully, I pressed the latch, and to my surprise, found a paper folded in four, hidden there for years. That fragment contained new encrypted letters, an extension of the blurred message on the note. It was as if Lane had prepared two layers, one visible to confuse and another hidden to guide those truly worthy of going further. This detail made me think. Lane knew he could trust no one, not even those investigating his death. So he left his truth where only someone patient and attentive would find it. The feeling of discovering this compartment was indescribable. It wasn't just the thrill of finding a new clue, but the certainty that the game had just shifted gears. The investigation, which had seemed to revolve around loose hypotheses, now gained substance. Lane hadn't left just any note. He'd left a labyrinth, and I had just opened the door to its second phase. But along with the excitement came the weight of doubt. If I'd managed to find it, who's to say the killer didn't know it too? What if the real target wasn't the safe, but this very secret compartment? These questions followed me like a shadow, reminding me that each answer I found brings with it new layers of uncertainty. And deep down I knew, the second twist wouldn't be the last. The longer I stared at that mutilated note and the new letters hidden on the clock, the more a question tormented me. Who really erased part of the message? Was it Lane, in a desperate attempt to protect something that shouldn't fall into the wrong hands? Or was it the calculating killer who chose to jumble the clues and leave me lost in a maze of uncertainty? This doubt was a constant weight, like a sharp blade pressed against the back of my neck. If it was Lane who had smudged the letters, it meant his priority was not to be understood, but to keep something hidden, even at the cost of his own life. In this case, the victim would not only be a victim, they would also be the guardian and accomplice of a secret that perhaps no one should know. If it was the killer who had tampered with the message, then I had before me an enemy more cunning than I had imagined, capable of playing with time and the minds of those investigating him. This dilemma wasn't just technical, it was also philosophical. In investigations like this, there always comes a time when the line between right and wrong blurs. What is protection? What is manipulation? What is absolute truth and what is merely the most convenient version? Lane, with his life dedicated to codes and secrets, knew how to play with this nebulous boundary. And now, even in death, he still forced me to face these uncomfortable questions. Deep down, I knew this answer would change everything. If it was Lane who hid the truth, perhaps his death was just the inevitable outcome of decades of choices. But if it was the killer, then I was dealing with someone who not only killed a man, but also attempted to murder logic, clarity, and history itself. And until this dilemma was resolved, each clue would remain a two-sided coin, flipping without ever revealing which side would land last. The sum of all the clues, the smudged note, the stopped clock, the secret compartment, and even the missing safe, finally pointed to a specific destination. The reconstructed cipher letters revealed an unlikely location, a forgotten underground library on the outskirts of the city, used decades ago as a repository for military archives. Lane had turned time into a guide, and each riddle led me to that silent, dusty place where the past still breathed. When I entered, I felt the heavy atmosphere of stories that should never be told. Shelves filled with aging documents, secret maps, confidential reports. It was like opening Pandora's box. At the bottom, among torn papers and sealed boxes, I found the last part of Lane's message. The full text left no doubt. He knew too much, and his secrets involved powerful, living, and influential figures. It was proof that his death was not an accident, but a planned silencing. The impact of that discovery was devastating. Suddenly, the murder was no longer just the death of one man, but an echo of global conspiracies. The killer, it seemed, wasn't acting alone. He was merely a piece on a much larger board, where every move was designed to protect truths that should never have come to light. The climax wasn't the revelation of the culprit, but the certainty that the truth, now in my hands, could change entire destinies. And it was at that moment that I understood Lane's true genius. He didn't leave a note simply to guide me to the killer. He left a riddle to force me to look beyond, to confront me with the most difficult choice revealed to the world what I'd discovered, and face unimaginable consequences, or keep the secret and allow the story to remain buried. And I confess, to this day, this dilemma still resonates with me, like a clock that never quite ticked again. So what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you reveal the whole truth, even knowing it could shake powerful institutions? Or would you keep the secret, allowing the story to remain hidden? This is the provocation that remains. Often, the biggest challenge isn't finding answers, but deciding what to do with them. Lane's investigation taught me that logic, enigmas, and even suspense aren't just tools for solving crimes. They're reflections of real life. We all carry secrets, choices, and dilemmas that in one way or another shape the course of our lives. The big question is, are we prepared to face the consequences, when the truth finally comes out. Now I want to hear from you. What part of this investigation resonated with you the most? Was it the smudged note, the stopped clock, or the missing safe? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because your insights could open up even more avenues for understanding cases like this. And of course, don't forget, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for our next videos. After all, there are still many enigmas out there waiting to be solved. And together we can go far beyond what meets the eye.